Now, Fran Lebowitz, you've built a career on exposing hypocrisies and pointing to the absurdities of modern life. I mean, as you scan the horizon, what lately has caught your attention? What deserves skewering in your view?
See, everything. I mean, this is probably the best time to be a grouch, you know, in all of history, because there's the most things to complain about, and at the moment they don't actually kill you for it, which they used to do, or burn you for it.
We've witnessed the Jackie Onassis auction, where tape measures are selling for $42,000, golf clubs for over $800,000. What does this say about the cult of celebrity or the Kennedys today to you?
Well, actually, I think in American money it was $48,000, the tape measure.
I mean, in Canada it's about $1 million too.
I think it proves that there is a sucker born every second. You know, it's no longer, modern life is speeded up, no longer every minute. I mean, I actually go frequently to auctions. And when I got the catalog to this, I had no interest in going since I saw there was nothing in it. I mean, it is kind of uplifting to know that you don't have a single thing in your house that isn't better than what Jackie Kennedy had in her house. But I was surprised at the coverage of it. I mean, not the amount of coverage, and also the fact that it continued. In other words, we did get the idea, all right? If a tape measures $42,000, it's very easy to then make a standard from that. Well, then, of course, a humidor would be $550,000 because that's probably the same difference between a tape measure that's 69 cents and a cigar humidor that's $25. So every day, they told you every single thing and how much it cost. I found it actually kind of dull.
It was interesting. It wasn't just the average schmo who was buying these things. I mean, celebrities in their own right were making these purchases.
Well,
the president of Guinness paid $2.6 million for a ring. I mean, are they trying to get closer to the Kennedys? Is that mystique still part of American life and the world's preoccupation?
Well, I think it was, you know, the average schmo was just the average schmo who has a lot of money. You know, I mean, it wasn't an audience made up of, you know, connoisseurs of furniture. Or, there were no dealers there. Except, I think the kind of, I located the kind of heart of this thing when I discovered that the bidder and the successful bidder on those faux pearls was the Franklin Mint. And I think that's pretty perfect. You know, it's this company that makes replicas of things. So they're buying something that's already a replica, and now they're going to make replicas of it at twice the price that it really was, which I think was about $150. And I think it's a kind of, it's a very extreme version of postmodernism, don't you think? I mean, it's just this circular thing that goes around and around. I mean, Arnold Schwarzenegger bought something. I mean, I know he's a celebrity, but you can't say he's a particularly discerning man, can you? I mean...
Now, you've written at length about the rich. I mean, from your observation, are they a different breed from us average schmoes?
Not this group, no.
No?
No, this group...
These are right in the middle of schmodom.
Yeah, this group was not the group that people ordinarily mean, I think. I mean, this basically, these are the same people that go to the Hard Rock Cafe, except they have a lot of money. And they're basically buying the same kind of souvenirs, except that they're just extreme versions of those. Usually when I write about the rich or comment on them, I have actually in mind a different group, a less homey group, perhaps, you know, and even maybe a less attractive group.
Well, I think you've been referred to as a social anthropologist among the affluent. In fact, in recent years, you've moved more and more freely among them. Are they wary of you and your wickedness?
No, because it's not personal. In other words, I actually seems a capacity to actually like rich people, if I happen to like them. I'm not really interested, to tell you the truth, in people like that. I mean, in individuals. For instance, I very rarely read biographies. I mean, how interested do you have to be in someone's life to read 400 pages? I'm more interested in the effects of wealth on people. In other words, you know, I think that if you're interested in human nature, kind of in the abstract, you can only see it among the rich, because they're the only people who get to act in an unfettered way. You know, they're the only people who don't have to answer to someone. And so it's easy, very easy to see. I mean, people always think that it's the kind of more natural, you know, the person living in a more simple environment who behaves most naturally. But I think that's really not true. I mean, a person who doesn't have to answer to anyone, they're themselves. They're allowed to be themselves. And so if there is a nice rich person, that is a really nice person, because that's someone who doesn't have to be nice.
New York. How much has growing up in New York, do you think, shaped your particular outlook on life, point of view?
I didn't grow up in New York. I grew up in a small town in New Jersey.
New Jersey. But you've lived there all your adult life, have
right.
you?
I've lived there since I was 18, which is actually longer than I lived in New Jersey.
I think in the introduction to your reader, it says that you don't believe you'd be allowed to live anywhere else other than New York.
But now the truth is that I'm barely allowed to live there. New York has become so suburban that it's becoming very much like a combination of the worst of both worlds. It's like the most densely populated, noisy, expensive, dirty suburban environment in the history of the world. And so that pretty soon I won't be allowed to live there anymore.
New York, again, from an outsider's point of view, seems to create a particular mindset. And part of that is kind of disdain for all the rest of America, which in turn seems to be reciprocated back on New Yorkers. I mean, is that tension part of American life?
Well, Americans hate cities, and that's always been true. I mean, that is not recent. I mean, if anything that you read, especially, fiction, even from the earliest American fiction, there is a distrust and hatred of cities because Americans have a Puritan background. I don't mean each individual American. And cities are places of sin because you can sin there because you don't know your next door neighbor. And lately, I mean, other things get added to it because, then also cities were places where different kinds of people lived. And so Americans, like everyone else in the world, are xenophobic. The hatred of cities is endemic to Americans.
But New Yorkers seem to, if not hate, certainly find great disdain for other than New York. I went and saw Fargo the other week, and it was interesting after I saw it, is that apparently that there's huge complaints among Midwesterners and people from Minneapolis in terms of how they were depicted, that they were bumpkins, and this was classically, New York-type humor.
Well, I mean, I think they should be thrilled that they had a movie named after their town. I mean, how many other movies are there about Fargo? It's not exactly a genre of movie making. I mean, I think New Yorkers have that attitude because life in New York is so relentlessly annoying that just surviving it makes you feel, it's like being the king of the jungle. Like, you think you could just get through one day here? Every single thing is a fight. And so I think New Yorkers feel like warriors, and warriors always look down on, the other classes. But I think that's the reason. But I think there's less and less reason for it. In other words, I think, America's gotten its revenge on New York because it's moved right in. Now it is a mall. And so, I think that that's the final victory of the suburban sensibility.
Now, the arrival of phone-ins on talk shows, television, you guys have hosted talk shows yourselves. I mean, has this given Americans, or you in particular, any kind of insight into the American mind these days?
Radio call-in shows, you mean?
Yeah. And TV, increasingly.
I don't like them. I don't approve of them. I really don't want to hear the Vox Populi turned up that loud. This is too much democracy. There's such a thing. I mean, because too much democracy is mob rule. I happen to be an elitist, by which I mean I believe that some people know more than others about certain things. And it's amazing how now Americans don't think anyone should know more than anyone else, hence the Congress that we have now, hence the president that we have now.
Now, you referred to Clinton as the prom king. I mean, is he the president the big generation deserves?
Yeah, he is. I mean, he's a generation, he's a president that my generation deserves. Yes, I'm sorry to say that. I mean, I think we could have been a little luckier maybe and gotten a president that we didn't deserve, that we couldn't live up to. That would have been nicer. I think that, he's a perfect exponent of that. I mean, except that he is, even for someone of that age, I can never remember how old he is. I just know he's
47 or...
So he's at least older than me, which is very important. That would be too depressing if he was younger. But that he's worse than the average person. Because the average, I mean, in that sense, because the average person does have some limit as to what they'll do to get something. But he's the same as every very successful person. He'll do anything.
We've got the prospects now of not simply Clinton-Dole head-to-head, but two generations head-to-head. I mean, is this going to create something new and exciting, interesting for observers of politics?
People are making a lot of how old Dole is. To me, now at the age of 45, he seems the correct age for a president. That seems like the right age. Yes, that's a good age for a president. 25 years older than me, that's the right age for a president. If I was 100, I feel the president should be 125. I think it's kind of silly, really, to look at people in generations, except people who come from generations where there was a real defining experience, which it is not true that Vietnam was that for my generation. That was, for most people in my generation, a media experience, which is not the same thing as a real experience. I mean, World War II, though, was a real defining experience for the generation that preceded my parents' generation. Most people in my father's generation fought, and most men fought in World War II. Everyone did. I am 45 years old. I do not know one single man who went to Vietnam. Not one. You know, so it was really a very small percentage of the population that went, and it wasn't that kind of defining experience. It was a party for the rest of us, you know, or people acting out their revolutionary fantasies or whatever, you know, people did with it. And the generation that Bob Dole is in is a generation that is much more admirable. In general, it's a much bigger achieving generation. There's just no question about it.
And he's appealing to those achievements of that generation, too, isn't he?
Well, but he has them. At least he has them. I mean, you know, he was brave in the war. That's something, you know. It's bravery. No one ever talks about that anymore. And I would not confine bravery to getting shot in a war. I mean, there's all kinds of bravery. Bill Clinton has none of the kinds of bravery there might be.
But our generation at least had Woodstock.
That was a very brave, courageous event, yes. I mean, people can be brave in different ways. They don't have to be brave, you know, as warriors. But he was brave, and he did endure, which is also a kind of bravery. It's not, I mean, people were sent to the war. People get shot whether they wanted to go or not. But he endured and triumphed over an injury. I don't feel I would be that sort of person. I would milk that for the rest of my life. So I got my arm hurt, I wouldn't be able to walk. I would use it as any excuse, and most people I know would do that. And so I don't, you know, I'm not interested in Bob Dole's politics. They're not my politics at all. But I think he has certain traits that are admirable.
I want to switch gears a little bit and just talk about talk versus writing. Two very, very different experiences, which you've done both more recently, more talk than writing. How different are the two? Well,
unfortunately, in my experience, they are unrelated. I mean, people are always saying, why don't you just tape record what you say and write it down?
Listen, reading your interviews, that struck me absolutely the same question.
But it's talking, it's not writing. It is not even related to writing, except that they both use words. I mean, I wish they were the same, because talking is a natural thing to me. I mean, to people who are talkers, they talk. And it's like having a trick thumb. You know, you could wake me up out of sound sleep if I was ever to have a sound sleep, and I could talk. But, you know, to gear up to write is a tremendous, you know, Herculean task for me.
Yeah, if conventional wisdom is that good talkers are good writers. Good writers aren't necessarily good talkers, but that direction almost always happens.
Well, that's why it's called conventional wisdom. Because I would have to say that the 2 or 3 most incandescent talkers I've ever known are really mediocre writers. And they're brilliant talkers. I don't think that really it is related, and I don't think it should be, actually. Writing is a really different process. Talking is from the top of your head. You know, writing seems to be like from your ankles. I mean, you know, writing is formal. You know, at least my writing is, and my interest in writing is a formal one. And talking is more than casual. You know, everyone can talk. Time you're 2, you can talk. Or however old I am. Actually, I don't want people calling up saying, no, you have to be 3. However old you're supposed to be when you talk. And for instance, there's no such thing as a child prodigy in literature. You know, it doesn't exist. So it's a very formal thing, and I just don't think it's related.
Is because you find talking so easy,
and writing so hard.
By comparison, the writing is difficult. I think you've referred to your situation as not writer's block, but writer's blockade.
Yeah, well, it's a lot of things. My difficulty with writing is a lot of things. However, there is no writer who doesn't find writing difficult to some extent. I've never heard anyone say, it's a breeze. You know, it's hard, and it doesn't matter how good you are either. In other words, it's absolutely true that it is just as hard to write a bad book as a good one. The only difference is talent. The effort is the same if someone makes the effort, if someone's really seriously making an effort. It's really hard because it's slowing down your thinking, whereas talking is your whatever thought comes into your head. Writing isn't that at all. I mean, writing is a really distinct process, and also one that's really at odds with the rhythm and the entire context of modern life.
Before this discussion, I was telling friends that I was interviewing Fran Lebowitz, and they, without exception, said, "Oh, that's great. She's so funny." Do you ever get fatigued with having to be funny all the time? The expectation of being funny?
No.
Quick?
No.
It doesn't wear you down? You say, well, I'd rather just stay in bed today than to go.
Well, then I do. I mean, the only time, and I'm pretty funny in bed, the only time that I would mind it would be in a social situation. In other words, most like this is a job. I mean, people, it's like a baseball player saying, why do I have to hit the baseball? Because that's why they hired you. So that I don't mind it at all. You know, I do not like always, you know, having people try to get you to make a toast or something like that. That is kind of irritating, but it's not the worst thing in the world.
But even in social functions, I'm sure when people come up, they expect you to be uproarious and quick all the time.
Luckily, I don't disappoint them. I mean, it's just not an effort for me. I mean, I often don't feel sociable. You know, I don't feel like talking at all. But I just don't think it doesn't bother me.
You've been in Canada many, many times. Anything about Canadians that has struck you as particularly interesting?
No. There's actually nothing about anyone that's ever struck me as particularly interesting. I am always so interested to note that some of the funniest people that everyone thinks are American are Canadian. You know, I mean, especially writers. I mean, comedy writers and comedians. And but in Toronto,
Survival technique, I think.
you think that's what it is?
Yes.
But I mean, it's really in the last maybe 15 years or more even. It's a very large percentage. It seems a very significant percentage. Other than that, no, I haven't really noticed.
Just back to what we were talking about earlier, I mean, you've characterized yourself as the laziest person in America. I mean, what do you do most days? Give me a typical Fran Lebowitz day.
See, I don't have a typical day, and that is really the hallmark of the sloth. You know?
You can't be bothered to repeat
right.
yourself.
I can't even have a typical day, because a typical day means you have some structure in your day. It means you at least, like, say, would eat at the same time. Even that would show a certain kind of, you know, rigor and discipline. I could really, you know, it's like sometimes you see like a little kid like lying, you know, on the grass staring into space. That's me, except I smoke. I mean, I could do that for hours on end. But mostly what I do is I read. You know, I'm like, exactly what my mother, you know, was afraid it would happen to me, that I would spend my whole life lying on the sofa reading. I have.
Now, you wrote a children's book, Mr. Chaz and Lisa Sue Meet the Pandas. Looking at your previous bodies of work with Interview Magazine and Metropolitan Life and others, I mean, you wouldn't expect that a children's book all of a sudden would come out of Fran Lebowitz. What was the motivation there?
Well, I always wanted to write a children's book, and I particularly did right after my first book, Metropolitan Life, came out. And my editor at the time, when I told him I wanted to do it, he said, of course you do. Everyone always wants to write a children's book for their second book because they're scared to write their second book. And since it was true that I was scared to write my second book, and since I was 27 at the time and I still listened to people, I thought, well, he's right. I shouldn't do it. And then I just kind of, I would think, well, I wanted to do it. But, you know, if you're as lazy as I am, most of the things you think about doing, you never do. But when I say most, I mean all, let's put it that way. My interest in children's books is just that I've always kept reading them. I know there's an enormous division between the two from a business point of view, which I discovered when I published this book. But to me, they're books. I mean, I just kept reading them along with other books. When I was a child, I read adult books too, and I just read all these books together. And so I've always been interested in doing it, and much to my surprise, I actually did something that I thought I would like to do.
Yeah, it's clear from both the books and subsequent discussions on the books and kids that you admire children and childlike qualities, but it also seems that you worry about them today.
Well, of course, I mean, naturally, you would worry about them. I mean, you know, I actually really feel sorry for people who have children, because I at least can, like, read all this news and listen to all the news and see that, you know, a lot of things are coming to an end, not the world necessarily, but a lot of the pleasures and opportunities of the world. And, you know, frankly, I'm 45, I smoke 2 packs a day, I'm not that worried. You know, but if I had children, I would be very concerned. I just think that the United States is very brutal to children, and it's very apparent. I mean, you can't help but notice it. It is really brutal because it's become such a hypocritical culture, and hypocrisy is most damaging to children.
Well, and in parenting, too. I mean, you don't expect, again, someone who is a satirist, a wit, a social commentator from New York of your generation to be railing against parents who aren't spending enough time parenting.
Well, that's just, you know, that's because I can clearly see how crummy adults are. You know, I mean, I can see how selfish people are. And it just stuns me. Not that people are selfish. I expect them to be selfish. But that they expect that it won't have any effect. Or so they make up. I mean, you know, the way you can say that, you know, certain generations invented certain things, my generation invented the idea they could make up anything they wanted. So they could say, yes, and even biology. I think a good age to have first child, 42. Oh, it's fantastic. You know, it's very good for a child to have such an old parent. No one ever thinks of that. How about for the kid? You know, I think I should do exactly what I want whenever I want to do it, which I do. But But I also didn't take responsibility for anyone else. People, they see it as a kind of accessory as opposed to what I think of as a terrible responsibility that I didn't want to have, but I also didn't take on. I mean, when I think how my parents behaved toward me and toward my sister, basically their life was kind of over once they had us. All the money had to go, to us, and all the attention. And my parents were really young. I mean, my mother was 23 when I was born. My father was 25. That was common at the time. It's less common now. And I would never have wanted to do that. At 23, I still thought I was 14 or 16 or, and I think I don't think it's bad for people to live their lives for their own pleasure. I don't. I just think they shouldn't then implicate innocent people who can't even walk out, It's just, there's so much concern for things that I think are really animal rights. Animal rights. I mean, some cat saved some other cats from burning, or appeared to save some other. I mean, I like to have people know this. I don't know if you're familiar with the story. It was on the news 24 hours a day. The Gulf War wasn't covered like this. A cat went into a burning house 7 times to take out its 7 little kittens. This was 1,000 people. The first day this was on the news, wrote in to adopt the kittens. I mean, you cannot walk out of your house in New York without seeing kids in the street. I mean, not by themselves, but kids who are in dire circumstances. The people walk right past them to call up to get the cat. I mean, I think it's hypocritical and it's absurd, and it's sentimentality. That excessive love of animals and the brutality toward children and the abandonment of the public school system. And just as someone who loves to read and as a writer, to see the unbelievably low level of literacy. I don't mean actually knowing how to read, which I suppose most people do, kind of make out a stop sign. But the fact that no one reads anymore, and it makes human life dull, and annoying.
Society tells us we're supposed to revere middle age, the prime of life is what it's known. You've said that you believe you personally are much suited to either childhood or you anticipate better for old age. What's the matter with this particular time in life?
Well, this probably is my old age, so I'll take it now. I think that middle age has certain advantages, but not nearly the advantages of, say, young age. It's just that you don't have the choice. I think that being 45 years old is not a thing you expect to happen to you. That's all. I mean, you just don't expect. I think when I was young, I don't know what I thought. I guess I thought it was an immutable quality. In other words, I thought some people are tall, some people are short, some people are young, some people are old, some people are white, some people are black, and I guess I thought I was a short, white, young one, and I was going to stay like that. And I don't know what I thought as I walked in the street and saw older people. I thought, like, what? They're not smart shoppers. They got that 45-year-old body instead of this 25-year-old body. So it is disconcerting.
But many people of our generation, myself included, I mean, are constantly saying, we're so lucky, because they've redefined what's old. And, Mick Jagger can be 53 and still prance around and be a role model for teenagers. You think that's kind of ridiculous, though, don't you?
I don't even think it's true, by the way. In other words, I think that we look at Mick, and we think, he's still Mick Jagger. But I guarantee you that a 16-year-old looks at Mick and thinks he's 53.
And ridiculous.
They may not think it's ridiculous because they didn't grow up with the idea that rock and roll was for young people like we did. Rock and roll is established popular music to them. Probably to him, he's like Frank Sinatra was to us. Like, we never said, how come Frank Sinatra can still stand on a stage and drink and croon into a microphone? But probably before that, they probably thought, well, Frank Sinatra was going to have his career over at a certain age because that's the thing that young boys do. And so I think they can't even imagine, all the changes that we've seen, so that we can think it's ridiculous, for instance, that Ronald Reagan became the president, because to us we had the idea that someone important should be the president. If it's going to be an actor, at least an important actor. They grew up with the idea. Ronald Reagan was the president. That's their idea of a president. So Bill Clinton must seem like Thomas Jefferson to them after Ronald Reagan. So they have completely different perspective on things than we do.
Now, your publisher, Random House, has been expecting your novel, Exterior Signs of Wealth, for a while. What are you going to have to do to get it done?
Well, actually now, I've changed publishers, so now Knopf is expecting
Knopf is expecting.
Same major. I forgot your question. I was so... Did you ask me what was going to be done?
Yeah.
Within the century. Within the century. I mean...
But you're progressing along?
Well, I'm inching along. And so a lot of people, or anyone who would think of this at all, because I haven't published a book aside from children's books since 1981. Imagine that this book has taken, I can't add, 13, 15 years to write. But I took 10 years out to sulk, so I don't want anyone to think that this is going to be a 3,000-page long book.
Well, Fran Lebowitz, we will await the publishing of your novel. And in the interim, I'd like to thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you.